so if you have any questions, I'm asking you to hold on to them because we're going to have a Q&A session, and I'm more than happy to take any questions you have at the end. Okay. So, welcome everyone, and welcome to Logos. I'm very happy to share the content I recently developed to talk to all of you. And if you happen to notice my swollen left eye, don't worry about it. There's nothing to do with violence. It's something called sty, and I don't want that to distract you. And before we go into this, I know Katie is actually from the States, so is there anyone in the group who is not an international student? Okay, good to know. So Katie, do me a favor. I'm going to ask you to hold me accountable for whatever I'm going to say about American culture, and let me know if you think it's not a true or fair representation. Can you do that for me?
Yes.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay. So one of the common things international students would experience when they live in another country is they would have a set of personal and emotional reaction that they would not have experienced in their home country. I'm going to give you more technical definitions, but that's culture shock. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to invite all of you to look up to the screen, and I'm going to show you some thoughts or inner talk, and I'm going to ask you to look at them and to see whether you can relate to or you can recognize some of them. Okay, so we need more time, or are we done here? Okay, so very interestingly, you all kind of reacted to this through either nodding or having a very uncomfortable face. But don't worry, I'm not going to call you out individually to tell me about your terrible experience. But if you recognize any of those thoughts, which means you have experienced or you are experiencing culture shock in this stage of your life. And before I say anything else, I want to acknowledge this is perfectly normal and you're not alone in this. So when interacting with a new culture, few people escape culture shock altogether, but many of them would be afflicted by it without the awareness of its presence and without knowing what's been bothering them. So there is a professor at Arizona University whose name is Michael Winkelmann, and he has studied culture shock for many years and has coached, has helped his students manage culture shock for many years. And when he reflected on those experiences, he said, "This experience has shown me that helping students manage their culture shock experience is fundamental to their success. And that's why we're here today. Because having an international background should not be a weakness, but it does come with challenges. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to make you aware of one of the challenges and offer you ways to manage those, to meet those challenges, and also to offer you a path forward to potentially make it, turn that into a competitive advantage." Oops. We're going to cover 3 parts today. So first, what is culture shock? What's the definition? What are some stages? Or what is the nature of culture shock? And the good thing to know is that it can be managed. So what are the ways we can manage this? And what are some of the strategies we can use to adapt to the culture to facilitate our study and professional development in the States? And in the last part today, we're going to explore the boundaries of adaptation. How do you strike a balance between your home culture and the host culture? And how can you make that balance and the process of striking the balance and turn that into something that's called the multicultural competence? Let's start from culture shock. So this is a topic has been studied for many years, since 1954. And in recent years, the more contemporary and accurate theories on culture shock view it as contact-induced stress accompanied by skills deficit that can be managed and ameliorated. And this is a more This is a more comprehensive definition of culture shock. It is essentially a multifaceted experience, which means it has many layers, many aspects, resulting from stressors that is created being in contact with a different culture, a new culture. So keep that in mind. So because culture shock is a long-lasting and dynamic process, and it can influence an individual in different period of time. So there are actually 4 different stages of culture shock. The first one, honeymoon stage. The word honeymoon captures the overall, overwhelming positive experience when one first arrives in a new country. And this stage is characterized by the feelings of interest, curiosity, excitement about all the new things you see and you hear and you eat in this new country. So if you stay in a new country for a short period of time, that might be the only thing you experience. But after, if you stay long enough in a new country, the honeymoon stage will finally pass, and followed by the fatigue and frustration from navigating in your everyday life in this new culture. And this is the stage when things start to go wrong. This is the stage when very minor things can become very problematic, such as getting lost, getting on the wrong train, especially in New York, and don't have the food accessibility or miscommunication. So the emotional reaction in this stage can be impatience, from frustration, or a feeling of isolation, or even depression. So the third stage is the recovery stage. This is the stage when people find ways to effectively adjust to the new culture. And adaptation means to learn the new skills that is required for you to survive in this new culture, and to accept how things are in this new country. And in this stage, your frustrations, your depression, whatever you have would be alleviated, and a new appreciation for this new culture would re-emerge. And this is the stage when things start to make sense to you again. And the final stage is the mastery stage, which means this is the stage where you actually find a way to participate fully in this culture, and you're actually part of this culture. And one thing to keep in mind is the 4 stages of culture shock. They can be both sequential and cyclical, which means the shift from crisis stage to adaptation stage can repeat, because the cultural environment you're in is not static. So whenever there's new elements or new stimuli that is added into the new environment, you need to adapt further additionally. And another thing to keep in mind about culture shock is that it's a very personal experience, which means it affects individuals in very, very different ways. The severity of culture shock, the duration of different stages for each one of you, can vary a lot based on your past life experience, based on your psychological personalities, based on the distance between your home culture and the host culture, and also can depend on how long you've been living in this new country. But the good news is that the culture shock can be managed. And here in the second part, we're going to learn what are some of the ways you can successfully manage culture shock. And recall the definition of culture shock. It's contact-induced stress that is accompanied by skills deficit. If that's the definition of culture shock, then let's learn those skills. It can be, the strategies can be broken down into two categories. The first is reestablished social network and communication skills. Communication skills include both verbal and nonverbal communication. So the first one, reestablish social network. So one of the major causes of anxiety in living in a new country is because people have already lost the family support or the social network they have already established in their home country. But as human beings, we're wired for attachments, for connections. So we need the validation through the acceptance and through the affirmation of others. So once we can re-establish satisfactory interpersonal or social connections in this new environment, it's going to become our major source of support for culture shock. And the first strategy here is to form diverse social network, which means to establish personal and social connections with both co-national and host national individuals. They're both equally very important. So the reason why a lot of international students seek support from their co-national classmates, that's because it's a behavior called maintenance behavior, or it's a reparative behavior, which is the ongoing activity or behaviors that you need to retain your social well-being. And the reason you want to mingle with your co-national friends is because you can find comfort, and that relationship can show because they can relate to each other, and you can find, you need the relationship to be the shelter from the strangeness, from the isolation in this new environment. But also, to socialize with the people in the host culture is also very important, because an increased contact with the host culture can not only improve your language skills and can also improve your self-confidence that can encourage you further to communicate more. And also, one of the best ways to establish your relationship or connections with a new environment is to establish connections or relationships with the people inside of the context. So this is also very important. 9 years ago, there's a study on international students' friendship, and they found participants with more host national friends appear to be more satisfied, socially connected, and less homesick. And the second strategy is to manage cross-cultural relationship expectations. Because we're making friends with people who are from the culture other than ours, it's very important to keep in mind that they might be very different from us, and they might have very different values, belief systems, or expectations from us. And those differences can be, one of the examples can be, so Edward Stewart wrote in his book, American Cultural Patterns, he says, Americans typically do not expect or accept strong commitments and obligations frequently associated with friendship in other cultures. And also another research studied on the friendship among international students also found people in the Chinese culture expect friends to perform helpful behaviors, whereas American friends expect friends to be good listeners. So those kind of differences are good to keep in mind when you're interacting with the host, people from the host culture or people from the country other than your home country, because managing expectation is very crucial in establishing satisfactory relationships. And let's move to communication skills. So the first strategy of verbal communication is very, very straightforward. Improve English language proficiency. This is, so there is a study made by a psychologist about what are some of the factors can influence international students' stress level. And this is what she found. Higher English fluency is correlated with less acculturative stress. Language proficiency is a significant predictor of academic adjustments. So, and also, language competence is also proved to be a predictor of less culture shock. So I cannot stress how important this is. But the focus should be to improve a fluency or fluency of speaking, reading, and writing. But you don't have to, or you should not focus too much on fixing your accent, because first of all, there is no such a standard accent of speaking English. There is British accent, there is accents from different parts of the States, there's French accent, so there is no single standard accent. And second, even though there is a single standard accent of speaking English, you don't need to speak the perfect English in order to communicate effectively. This leads us to the second strategies, to give yourself permission to speak as a foreigner. This is more applicable to people who are from non-English speaking countries, because a lot of the times the stress or anxiety in life is caused by the gap between what we need and what we desire. If you set the goal to be, like I used to set, you set the goal to be, I'm going to speak the perfect language as the native speaker do. So first of all, that's pretty much impossible. And second of all, again, you don't need to speak perfect English, perfect language to be able to communicate effectively. So if a person can speak English in a very fluent and articulate way, and people can understand this person 100%. And if this person is also packaged with the right nonverbal communication, nonverbal signals we're going to cover later, then he or she is very likely to become an effective communicator. So again, you don't need to speak the perfect English to be able to communicate effectively. And also this means you don't feel like you have to catch the speaking speed of a native speaker, because first of all, that's speaking very fast is in no way a best practices for effective communication. And also, if during a presentation or in a meeting, if you feel like you need to think of a word or you need time to organize yourself because you're speaking second or third language, then give yourself the permission to pause. Because pause can be very helpful sometimes in communication, like what I just did, because it grabs people's attention. And also, pause can also help you very effectively in organizing your thoughts. You can in pausing, you can get rid of all the filler language like, well, you can just pause. So give yourself permission to speak as a foreigner. And words is by no means the only form of communication. Our brains are constantly gathering information from whatever we see and hear. And we're essentially constantly be both the receiving end and the giving end of nonverbal cues. So it's very important, especially when you're in a new culture, it's important to learn those nonverbal communication rules in this host culture and in general to be able to navigate yourself in this new environment. The first strategy is to be conscious and deliberate about all the nonverbal messages you send. So all the images you see, all the colors you see in this slide deck, they were chosen intentionally to make you feel in certain ways. And this morning I put myself together. I even put on some makeup because I want to send the message to all of you that I take this seriously. Because now we know our brain processes those nonverbal cues subconsciously, then we can take the power of the subconscious needs to our use, which means we can make all the nonverbal cues about ourselves to be at the service of whatever the real message we want to send. And the second strategy is to learn social interaction rules, etiquettes, and other behaviors that are understood in the host culture. And this is especially important if you're in a professional setting. So I'm going to give you two examples. Your appearance matters a lot. It's not about whether you're good looking or not. It's about, especially in American professional setting, it's about how much efforts you're willing to put into how you show up professionally in front of people. So the first rule is to always better to overdress than to underdress, because it almost doesn't hurt to tell the audience that I care too much about this. So second, eye contact. The American way, accepted way of making eye contact is to have very firm and direct eye contact, because averting eye contact can be seen as lack of confidence, or can be seen as you have something to hide, and that's something you don't want. But we don't have time to cover too much in this section, but the rule of thumb is to mirror behaviors, which means you have to learn, you have to observe what are other people doing in this environment and to do what they're doing. So for example, if you're in a company where everyone wears shirts and jeans to work every day, it doesn't make sense for you to wear a suit to work. So let's move to the last part. Now, who can tell me what is the key word or what are the keywords in this sentence? Anyone? Go ahead.
To my mind, resolution acceptable.
Resolution acceptable. Okay. What else?
Adaptation.
Anyone else?
Adaptation to the new culture.
Adaptation to the new culture. Okay. Anyone else? Please.
Learning and adaptation.
Okay. Okay, thank you. They're all very important, but the only most important keyword I want to emphasize is acceptable. So we're going to begin the last section by figuring out what the heck does it mean to be acceptable. Acceptable both externally to the environment you're in, but also acceptable internally to yourself. So here we need to understand a new concept, which is assimilation, cultural assimilation. The minority group's adoption of the cultural patterns of the host society or dominant social groups. So if you make the conscious decision to adapt into this new culture, then most of us, our first instinct would be to assimilate as much as we can. And that's totally fine until we encounter something called conflicting situations, which means situations that involve conflicting norms, values, or belief systems between one's home culture and the host culture. So I'm going to give you one example. So remember the American way of making eye contact? I know in a lot of Eastern cultures, you're not supposed to stare at a person. That is perceived to be very rude or even inappropriate, especially among different genders. So what emerges with this conflicting situation is a series of questions. So what do I do now? Should I replace all of my home culture with the standard in the new culture? Or if not, where should I draw the line? Where should I keep myself in between of fully assimilation and keeping part of my cultural authenticity? So here is this conflicting situation is the point you have to make a conscious decision about whether to assimilate or not. And because having this kind of conflicting situations is one of the most difficult situations or difficult problems you have to face in dealing with culture shock or in living in a new culture. Because essentially what happens here in this kind of situation is your identities or your values or your beliefs that has already formed in the old culture are called into question. But in order to make the decision about whether to adopt or not, you have to first do something named value assessments. Because we first need to know, and that's something I want all of you to do. The first thing after today is to ask who I am, is to ask what are some of my identities and what do I believe, and also to think about what are some of the values or beliefs from my home culture that I really need to be able to be myself. Because if you don't know about your values, you're unprepared to resolve this kind of conflicting situations. So once you know about your values, here's a two-question decision criteria to guide you to make the decision of whether to assimilate, to conform or not in a specific situation. The first question is, would I be able to keep my core values intact and live comfortably with myself if I conform or assimilate? The second question is, would it offend host population or hurt my access to resources that I could have received otherwise if I don't conform or assimilate? This sounds very vague and philosophical, so I'm going to give you two examples. So remember the example about making eye contact? I'm going to use that as the first example. And I'm going to only speak for myself because I don't know about your values. So would I be able to still live comfortably with myself and keep my core value intact if I adopt the American way of making eye contact? Yes, because I don't care about how to make eye contact. And would it offend host population or hurt my access to resource if I don't adopt the American way of making eye contact? Yes. Because, like I said before, it's going to be perceived as lack of confidence or you're hiding something. So, because So cultural competence means a person can understand the culture well enough to be able to work or communicate with the people in this culture effectively. So we're all competent in our own culture because at least for most of us, we can speak the language, we know the nuances, so we can pretty much navigate our everyday life in the home culture with no problems. But rarely a person can reach something called multicultural competence, which means fluency in more than one culture, in whichever cultures are part of the surroundings. So what does it mean? If we're talking about the setting for international students, having a multicultural competence means you're able to work and communicate effectively in this host culture. But if one day you choose to go back home, you can also function well in that environment. Excuse me. But this is more than that. Because culture is a very vague concept. It can be culture formed by different countries, different nations. It can also mean cultures formed from different identities. So, such as the culture formed by different race, different gender, different religions, different sexual orientation. So this is really something, if you reach, it can be really multiplied. It can be really duplicable in whatever settings you are in. Which means if you ever reach multicultural competence, then you're very likely to flourish in a new, unfamiliar culture compared to the person who might only competent in one culture. Because all of these things we've learned in the process of managing culture shock and adapting to a new culture, this is some asset that is going to stick with us for the entire life. And it's going to benefit us in later life more than we think. So first, learning and problem-solving capacities. Because the whole culture adaptation process is essentially learning the skills to solve problems. So a writer from the New York Times is that many immigrants may have an added edge because of their ability to straddle the seemingly contradictory values of their birthplace and their adopted land, and also perspectives and knowledges. So we are able to, after you reach the multicultural competence, a person is able to understand or be able to have the perspectives from not only one culture, from both your home culture and this new culture. And also you would have the knowledge of how people function, not only in your home culture, but also in the new culture. And you would have the capacity to quickly understand how people function even if you're in a new culture. And also adaptabilities, flexibility, empathy, and an open mind. Those are all the things we are going to have as a very precious asset if we ever reach the point of multicultural competence. We don't reach the multicultural competence in one day, but I hope the last part at least offers you a path forward, offers you something to look up to or to aim for. So I hope after today, you're going to have a very fresh look at your international background. And also, I hope you to view, I'm going to invite you to view whatever struggles you have right now as a gift. And potentially, starting from today, using what we've learned, potentially turn that into your competitive advantage. That's all. Thank you. So I think we still have about 10 minutes for Q&A session. So if you have any questions about the content or about whatever Kristin or Fred has said, so feel free to raise your hands to ask a question. Please.
So what was your experience coming here and how were you able to adapt?
I think the culture shock has been with me for a very long time, and I think it's still with me, part of it. But I did not know what was happening to me until I just came across very randomly about an article talking about culture shock, because I didn't know what the heck is this before. And I think for me, the key part is really to do something, like Kristin said, that scares you. To force myself, because I'm really, I think I'm uncomfortable right now. So it's really about forcing myself to mingle or to socialize with people that are other than Chinese. And also to force myself to communicate more so I can improve my English and improve my other skills. And pretty much did whatever, because what I just shared is a combination of existing research and also my own lived through experience. So it's pretty much, I did pretty much all of that. And also the second part of striking a balance is when I reach a point, I think I'm really struggling here, because as you might be aware that the Chinese culture is really different from American culture. So I encountered many of the conflicting situations. So I was really struggling, okay, what should I do right now? Should I just keep adapting, and there's no boundaries, or should I do something about it? So that's when I started to think, okay, how can I set the boundary? And I also start to think, okay, once you set the boundary, and in the past we all look, like most of us, we all look at the international background as a disadvantage, because you have to get the visa, you have to get the sponsorship, you have all the difficulties, you don't speak the language, part of many of us, not all of us. So when you actually view that as a disadvantage, that's really gonna keep you, it's going to cause you a lot of unnecessary stress, and it's really going to keep you from adapt further, like I said, to turn this actually into a competitive advantage. So this is after 4 years, I figured this out. So I'm sharing this with you because I've suffered and I've struggled, and I'm happy I've lived through the experience, but I hope I can help you so you don't have to live through the struggles. Thank you. Other questions?
What do you think about the difference between the school time and the working?
You mean, do you have a specific aspects about the experience, or just in general?
Like, for example, when you are still attend college, and students, like classmates and teachers that will treat you very friendly. I mean, most of them. But whether if there's a time that when you start your work and your boss and colleagues are become quite tough to you.
Well, I guess I don't have that experience because I'm here. I think the major difference for me is really a change of mindset, because when you're working, you're not in school. Actually, because when I was in school, all I have to concern is about my schoolwork, is about my paper, is about my readings. So it's a more simple world to live in when you're in school, and you have a set schedule, and you don't have to intentionally to make some efforts or to make some changes. All you have to do is to study well, to finish your homework. But when you're actually working, so you're actually become a social animal. You become a socialized person, so you're actually in this by yourself. So for me, I think it's a really, it's a point for you really reach the point of like being all by yourself, independent. You're not only, which is good, you're not only economically independent, and you're also responsible for all of your behaviors, and you have to intentionally make a series of changes or decisions in order to get you to your goals. So it's really a change of mindset because you don't have to think that when you're in school.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yep. Go ahead.
So as international students who are maybe looking to stay in the US after graduation, one thing we all have to deal with is things like OPT and H-1B. So how would you suggest or recommend we, as like students or grads looking for work, how do you convince an employer to take that chance on you for potential long-term future employment, even if you might only be able to work with them for like a year, or it's something that's more work for them to also just invest in you for that 1 year. So how would you suggest we turn our international background into a competitive advantage?
So one thing I always advise or suggest people to do is you don't have to, otherwise unless they ask. So if they don't ask, you don't have to put this forward to say, I need the visa, I need the sponsorship, and I'm going to be out of here after 1 year. You don't have to say all of that unless they ask. Because you don't know and they don't know, because even if after the 1 year stay, you make up your mind, you think it's the right place for me, I'm gonna stay, it can also be possible. And because my experience when I was looking for work is that when that's out there, the door is just completely closed for you. So you don't have to put everything forward first. And the reason for this presentation is that you really have to make the case in front of your potential employers that I am different, and I am different from the people you can employ in American workplace. And I really have some set of skills that you might not necessarily find in other, for example, American students or American people. So you really have to think about, what are some of the things that really differentiate me from the rest? And how can I make the case to tell them that I can contribute something more that American students might not be able to? Yep. Any other questions?
So you talked about acceptable workplace behavior, and what are some of the common mistakes that you personally observe, or other international students that are having or like suffering those mistakes in workplace or in any kind of like professional settings that they are experiencing that mistake? It's not acceptable to American culture.
I think the dress code I mentioned is something I noticed very important. And also, according to my experience, I think another thing to keep in mind that I've seen people making mistakes is sometimes a lot of the Asian cultures, the boundary between people, the personal space is a lot closer than people in the American culture, especially in professional setting. So it's very important to respect their personal space, respect their privacy, and to do not overshare. Because what I heard about other people having impression of some international students going into a workplace is that especially I know about Chinese culture, is Chinese people sometimes is struggling of fighting boundaries. Sometimes they overshare, and that can be perceived as you're a reckless person. you don't have boundaries, and that's something to keep in mind. And also about making promises. So at least in American culture, it's a very huge thing about keeping your promises, and it includes to do not be late, to be punctual, and also if you want to make promises, to always make sure you under promise and over deliver, because if you over promise and you under deliver, that's going to cost your trustworthiness in front of your employers or your coworkers.
Awesome, thanks.